He stepped to the podium and whispered, "I'm not here to talk about innovation. I want to talk about Moses." What followed wasn't a tech talk, but a raw confession about fear, calling, and the weight of leading through uncertainty. Why did Elon Musk compare himself to Moses? And what did it reveal about his deepest doubts? Before we continue this incredible story, let us know where you're watching from. If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel, because tomorrow we have another inspiring story you won't want to miss. The room was dimly lit, quiet and still. A simple spotlight cast a soft glow across the stage, where Elon Musk stood behind a plain wooden podium. No screens, no tech, no slides, no fanfare. Just him. The usual buzz that followed him into rooms like this was absent. Instead, there was something more fragile in the air, something sacred. The audience, a mix of engineers, entrepreneurs, students, and leaders, leaned forward slightly, unsure what they were about to hear. Elon's hands rested on the edge of the podium, fingers lightly gripping the worn surface. He looked down for a moment, gathering himself, and then looked up. He didn't smile. He didn't clear his throat like he usually did when opening a keynote address. Instead, he simply breathed in deeply and began to speak. "I'm not here to talk about innovation or space," he said softly, his voice carrying through the silence. "I just want to tell you a story. About Moses." There was a slight rustle as the crowd shifted in their seats. Moses? That wasn't what they expected. This wasn't a TED Talk. It wasn't about AI or Mars or Neuralink. This was something else, something deeply human, and no one in the room moved, afraid to miss a single word. Elon's voice trembled slightly as he continued, his eyes not fixed on any one person but somewhere far away. Moses, the man who led an entire people out of slavery, the man who faced down Pharaoh, who parted the Red Sea. He's remembered as a hero, a leader, a giant. He paused, searching for the next words. But what struck me is that Moses didn't feel worthy. He didn't want the job. And lately, I've felt the same way. The air in the room grew heavier. Elon's voice was not dramatic, not rehearsed, it was raw. Moses said to God, "Who am I that I should go?" He said, "I'm not a good speaker." He doubted himself every step of the way. And I get that, I really do. He gripped the podium a little tighter, his knuckles whitening. For a man often described as larger than life, who dreamed of Mars and reshaped entire industries, this wasn't a presentation. It was something else entirely. A confession. A moment of opening. A human being reaching for understanding through a story thousands of years old. In that moment, everyone in the room understood this wasn't about Moses. This was about Elon. About doubt. About calling. About the quiet fear of not being enough. Elon took a quiet breath, steadying himself before continuing. "People often look at me and assume I've got it all figured out. They see the rockets, the cars, the satellites. They think I'm confident, certain, maybe even fearless." He paused. But that's not always true. He looked down for a moment, letting the silence speak before lifting his eyes again. "There are nights when I lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I'm the right person for the things I've taken on, wondering if I've led people down the wrong path, wondering if I'm strong enough to carry what I've been given." His voice dropped to a softer tone. "I've felt the weight, the pressure to always innovate, to never falter. And at times, I've cracked under it." The crowd was completely still. "That's why Moses speaks to me," Elon continued. "He didn't want the role. He didn't feel capable. He argued with God. He actually said, 'Please send someone else.' And yet God still chose him. Not because he was eloquent, not because he was strong, but because he trusted. Because he took that step forward, even in fear." He looked away, remembering something unspoken. "There have been moments when I've whispered, not to the world, but in the quiet of my own soul. I don't know if I can do this. Moments where I've asked for strength, for clarity, even though I wasn't sure who, if anyone, was listening. Elon paused again, letting the confession breathe. But maybe that's the point. Maybe we're not chosen for our perfection. Maybe we're chosen in our doubt. Maybe it's the willingness to step forward, even without answers. That's the truest kind of faith. He let the words hang in the air, honest, vulnerable, and deeply human. Elon rested his hands on the podium again, steadying himself as he faced the room. "We live in a world that worships strength," he said. "Certainty, confidence. People expect leaders to be bold, unshakable, decisive, especially someone like me." He gave a quiet laugh, dry but honest. "But I've learned something about strength. Sometimes it's a mask, a way to hide everything that's shaking beneath the surface." He let the words hang before continuing. "People want data, projections, blueprints. We rely on numbers to tell us we're doing the right thing. We use logic to control uncertainty, and I've done that my whole life." He looked down, his voice softening. But Moses? He had none of that. No spreadsheets, no AI, no probability models. All he had was a voice, a calling, and a fear he couldn't shake. Elon glanced out over the audience, eyes searching, and yet he still moved forward. A hush settled over the room. "I've thought about quitting," he admitted, "many times. Just walking away, selling everything, disappearing." He paused. "There are days when the pressure gets so loud I can't hear anything else. Days when the weight of leading, of building something that might change lives, feels unbearable." He exhaled slowly. "But there's something that keeps pulling me back. I don't even know what to call it, but it's there. It whispers, 'Not yet. There's more to do.'" The silence in the room deepened, heavy with shared emotion. "There was one night," Elon said, his voice dipping into a quiet register, "when I was alone in my study. Everyone had gone home. The world outside was still. I was exhausted, mentally, emotionally. I felt like I was standing in front of my own Red Sea, and I didn't know what to do." He closed his eyes for a moment, remembering. "I didn't hear anything out loud, but I said something, not to anyone in particular, just out into the air, into the silence. I said, 'If there's a way through this Red Sea, please, show me.'" He opened his eyes again, and the sea didn't part, not right away, but the next morning something small shifted. It wasn't dramatic, just clarity, just enough to take one step. He leaned slightly forward. "We're taught that strength is about never doubting, but I think strength is actually found in doubt, in the moments when you want to stop, but take one more step anyway." Elon drew a long breath and looked into the crowd. Moses wasn't fearless. He was reluctant. He was unsure. But he still led. He still stepped into the unknown with nothing but faith. And maybe that's what real leadership is, walking forward, not because you have the map, but because you believe there's something worth walking toward. The audience sat motionless, not because they were waiting for something dramatic, but because they recognized the truth in his words. In Elon's vulnerability, they saw their own reflection, the same fear, the same longing, the same question. Is there a way through this Red Sea? And in his story, they began to believe, maybe there is. Elon stood a little taller, but his voice grew quieter, almost as if he were speaking just to himself. "One of the hardest parts of leading," he began, "is the loneliness." He let that word settle in the air. People think leadership is all power, all control, but most days it's silence. You make decisions no one understands. You carry weight that nobody sees. And sometimes, no matter how much you give, it still isn't enough. He looked out across the crowd, and for the first time his voice trembled. "Like Moses, I sometimes feel I'm leading people who don't fully trust me. I'm trying to take them somewhere better, some future I can barely explain. But they doubt me. They question everything. And the truth is, sometimes I do too. A murmur moved gently through the audience, but no one spoke. Elon continued, his words slower now. There have been nights, too many to count, when I sat alone staring out at the stars, thinking about the path I've chosen, wondering if it's all worth it. He paused, his expression distant, wondering if the long hours, the criticism, the misunderstandings, if any of it really makes a difference. His hands tightened on the podium. What if I never see the end of it? What if I spend my life building something for others and never get to experience it myself? He took a shaky breath. That's the part of Moses' story that breaks me, he said. He gave everything, his time, his strength, his belief. He led people who doubted him, who turned on him, who begged to go back to slavery when the journey got hard, and after all of it, he didn't even enter the promised land. He only saw it from a distance. Elon shook his head slowly. I think about that all the time. What if I'm laying the bricks for a future I'll never walk on? What if my work is just the foundation for something someone else will build? His voice softened, but the emotion behind it deepened. And then I asked myself, is it still worth it? The silence that followed was thick, not with confusion, but with empathy. People weren't just listening anymore. They were remembering their own sacrifices, their own long nights, their own roads they weren't sure would ever lead to somewhere better. Elon looked down, then back up. I don't have the answer, but maybe Moses didn't either. Maybe he just kept going because he believed it mattered, even if he wouldn't see the end. His voice steadied as he added, maybe it's not about standing in the promised land. Maybe it's about making sure others can. A few people in the crowd wiped at their eyes. Others just sat still, absorbing the weight of his words. Leadership is lonely, Elon said. Not because no one is around you, but because no one sees the cost, the doubts, the nights you wonder if you're lost. And yet, something keeps you going. He took one final breath before closing the thought. Moses didn't lead because he had certainty. He led because he had trust, not in himself, but in something greater. And that's what I'm trying to learn. As the lights dimmed slightly and the silence held, the room didn't feel empty. It felt full of unspoken doubts, quiet hopes, and the kind of honesty that reaches deeper than speeches ever could. Elon took a breath, then leaned slightly into the microphone. His eyes, once darting and uncertain, now held a quiet intensity. There's a moment in Moses' story that's always struck me, he said, his voice low but steady. The breaking point. The room hushed further, the audience already wrapped in the rawness of what he was sharing. Moses had led the Israelites out of Egypt after everything. The confrontations, the plagues, the pleading. He'd done it. He'd stood up to the most powerful empire on earth and walked away with a nation behind him. And then, Elon's voice grew even softer. He ends up trapped. The Red Sea in front of him, Pharaoh's army behind. No way forward, no way back. He paused, hands resting on the podium. There are nights, he said, when I feel exactly like that, standing at the edge of something massive, uncertain, terrifying. No roadmap, no instruction manual, just fear. Fear that I've taken it all too far, that I've led people to a place I can't lead them out of. A few people in the audience shifted, visibly moved. But then I remember, Elon said, his voice building with quiet conviction, that Moses didn't part the sea by understanding it. He didn't wait until he knew exactly how it would work. He just did what he was told. He raised his staff. He looked out over the room. The sea didn't part until the staff was raised. The words hung in the air, echoing longer than they were spoken. That's what I think faith really is, he continued. Not religion, not blind belief, but movement, action, trust. Taking the next step, even when it doesn't make sense. Raising your staff, even when the sea in front of you looks endless. Elon's voice faltered, just slightly, but he pushed on. I've had moments where I wanted to stop, where I thought, maybe it's not worth it. Maybe the criticism is right. Maybe the vision is too big, the risks too high. But something inside wouldn't let me quit. He paused again, this time letting the silence settle before continuing. I realized I wasn't being asked to part the sea, I was just being asked to raise the staff, to take the next step, even if I didn't see how it would work. The metaphor began to shift, less about Moses, more about all of them. Maybe that's what we all need to do, he said, in our own lives, in our own impossible situations. Raise the staff, whatever that looks like. Make the call, say the words, show up one more day, even when we don't know how it ends. He stepped slightly back from the podium, then leaned in again. Because that's when the sea moves. That's when the impossible begins to shift, not before, but after we say yes, after we step forward. The audience sat still, gripped by the simplicity and truth of it. I'm not Moses, Elon said quietly, but I understand him now. I understand what it's like to stand between the sea and the army and feel like there's no way through. But still, raise the staff. He paused, eyes locking with someone in the crowd. Maybe that's what you need to do too. The room didn't applaud, not yet. It was as if everyone was waiting, sitting with the message, measuring their own red seas. Elon stepped back from the podium once more. His shoulders were tired, but his eyes were clear. Elon stood motionless for a long moment. The silence stretched, but no one moved. Then his voice returned, calmer, steadier, carrying something deeper than before. There's one part of Moses' story, he said, that I can't shake. It's not the plagues, not the Red Sea, not even the 10 Commandments. He looked out across the crowd, pausing before continuing. It's the end. He took a slow breath. Moses never entered the Promised Land. The words fell like a weight across the room. He led the people through 40 years of wilderness, Elon said. He carried their complaints, their doubts, their rebellion. He fought battles, he climbed mountains, he gave everything he had, and in the end, he saw the land from a distance, but never stepped into it. A hush rolled through the audience. For a long time, Elon admitted, that felt cruel, unfair. How could someone give so much, sacrifice so much, and still not get the reward? He looked down briefly, then back up. But then I realized, maybe the Promised Land was never about Moses. Maybe it wasn't his to enter. Maybe it was his to make possible. There was a subtle shift in his tone, no longer uncertain, but purposeful. That one realization, he said slowly, changed everything for me. He paused again, this time letting the message settle before adding, what if your mission isn't about what you receive, but about what you help others become? What if legacy is more important than reward? The words carried, not with volume, but with gravity. I used to think leadership meant getting to the end first, he continued. Now I think it means making sure someone else can get there at all. The audience was visibly moved, some nodding, some dabbing at their eyes, others just still in quiet reflection. It's not about me, Elon said. It never was. It's about what we're building for the next generation, for people we may never meet, for futures we may never see. He stepped forward, off the shadows of the podium and into the light. Moses didn't fail because he didn't cross the river, he said. He succeeded because he made it possible for others to do so. He let out a breath, this time lighter. And maybe, he added, just maybe, that's what fulfillment really looks like. Not finishing everything, but faithfully doing your part. He scanned the crowd one more time, his voice lowering into a soft, intimate tone. So if you're standing in the wilderness right now, if the reward feels out of reach, maybe you're still exactly where you're meant to be. The final line struck deep. Maybe your greatest impact will come not from where you arrive, but from what you leave behind. The room held its breath. And in that moment, every person present understood. This was no longer just Elon's story. It was theirs too. Elon took a step back from the podium, his hands falling to his sides. For a moment, it looked as if he might finish there, but then he leaned forward again, eyes steady, voice low but resolute. Even when the path gets harder, you keep going. The room stayed still, hanging on every syllable. Moses followed the call, Elon said. He stepped forward in obedience. But what happened next? Did things get easier? No. Pharaoh pushed back. The people complained. The road grew harder. He paused, letting the truth settle. That part has stayed with me, because I used to think if something is right, it should get easier, but that's not always how it works. He clasped the edge of the podium again. Faith isn't certainty. It's continuing even when things get worse before they get better. It's holding on when you're tired and showing up when it would be easier to disappear. He looked out at the audience. I've had moments, quiet, alone, where I've asked, why does this feel harder after I said yes? Why does following what feels right bring more resistance, not less? He shook his head gently. But I see it now. Moses didn't walk a path of comfort. He walked a path of calling, and calling demands sacrifice. Elon's voice deepened, not in volume but in depth. I used to measure success by what I built. Rockets launched, goals achieved, technologies released, but I'm starting to see my journey differently now. He straightened slightly, his words more assured. This isn't just a climb to success. It's a road of obedience, of serving something greater than myself, of leaving a path for others, even if I don't get to walk the whole thing. He looked down, then back up, eyes misted but focused. We don't lead for applause, he said. We don't lead for the spotlight. We lead for the people who will walk farther than we ever will. A hush rippled through the crowd. I think about my children. I think about the teams who followed me through storms. I think about the young people out there trying to figure out if they matter, if they're enough. He gestured gently toward the audience. And I realize now, my job isn't to finish everything. My job is to build faithfully, to trust that what we start today will become what they carry tomorrow. He paused again, hands resting softly on the podium, his voice lowering as he drew the moment inward. Maybe you're standing at your own Red Sea tonight. Maybe you've said yes to something that got harder instead of easier. Maybe you feel like turning back. He shook his head gently. Don't. He looked up, voice growing firm with conviction. You don't need to have all the answers. You don't need to feel strong. You just need to take the next step, raise the staff. Trust the water will part. The room was utterly quiet, not from lack of energy, but from the depth of shared emotion. Elon stood still, breathing slowly. And when it feels like no one notices, when it feels like your obedience is invisible, remember Moses. Remember that leadership is not about crossing the finish line yourself. It's about opening the way. He stepped back, his final words hanging in the silence. You may not see the promised land, but your footsteps will help someone else get there. And with that, he let the silence speak what his voice no longer needed to say. Elon stood still behind the podium, his final thought lingering in the hushed room. Then, with a voice just above a whisper, he said, Maybe our greatest task is not to cross the sea, but to believe it will part. He stepped back slowly, hands loose at his sides. The silence wrapped around him like a warm, reverent curtain. He took a breath, turned to leave, and then looked back once more. Even if we never see the outcome, keep walking. There was no thunderous applause, just presence, just hearts stirred. In that moment, the message was clear. Faith is not about certainty, it's about courage, not about arriving, but continuing, and not always for ourselves, but for those who will follow in our steps. If this inspiring story stirred something in you, subscribe now for more powerful journeys into faith, courage, and purpose.